The Middle East is a part of the world that nowadays has its fair share of Grands Prix, and new ones seem to pop up every 6 months or so. However, there was a time where this very much wasn't the case, and the region actually didn't host its first Grand Prix until 2004. The location which was to become a mainstay of the F1 calendar was the brand new Bahrain International Circuit, designed by Herman Tilke in Sakhir, Bahrain, and I personally am actually quite a fan of it. Sure, Bahrain itself may have a dodgy human rights record, and sure, it may have left a sour taste in people's mouths when it started replacing Melbourne as the season opener, but with a combination of fast, slow and medium speed corners and even a healthy dose of elevation change, it's still a track which is as distinctive as it is challenging. Qualifying for the first ever Bahrain Grand Prix was unbelievably hot, and it caught out Fernando Alonso, who ran wide at the final corner. The qualifying format at the time meant that every driver only got one flying lap, and so Fernando would qualify 17th, improving to 16th due to an engine penalty for Nick Heidfeld. Another driver whose engine failed him was Kimi Räikkönen, who didn't set a time in qualifying and would start 19th, ahead only of the also penalised Jolt Baumgartner. At the front of the field, it was yet another Ferrari whitewash, with Michael Schumacher taking pole position by almost 0.4 of a second from his teammate Barrichello. At this point in time, Ferrari were on a 5-race winning streak, leaving the rest of the field fighting for second best. Best of the rest on this occasion was Williams, as Juan Pablo Montoya started third, with Ralf Schumacher fourth, and then the BARs of Takuma Sato and Jenson Button took fifth and sixth. It was 2 by 2 as they lined up in the desert. When the race got underway, the Ferraris got away predictably well, as did Sato and Trulli, both of whom got ahead of Ralf Schumacher. Then Michael Schumacher locked up into turn 1 but got away with it, and I think there might have been a slight bit of contact between Giorgio Pantano and Fernando Alonso. I am a bit confused though, because it looked like a little bit of debris came off the Jordan, and yet later on in the lap, the front wing and end plate all looked to be intact. Meanwhile, there's Cristiano Di Matta having a little off from 9th place, losing out to Parnis, Webber, Fisichella, Massa, and nearly Kimi Räikkönen, who was up 5 places. At the end of the first lap, the order was Schumacher, Barrichello, Montoya, Sato and Ralf Schumacher, as Webber passed Coulthard for 9th place. After his poor qualifying, things went from bad to worse for Fernando Alonso as he was forced to pit for a new front wing. While we didn't see the exact moment of contact that forced this stop, you can see on the replay how he stuck his nose up the inside of Christian Klien's Jaguar and then just got it chopped off. A little bit of inexperience for the man who is nowadays the most experienced driver in Formula 1. With the Ferraris escaping out in front, the main battle was for 4th place between Ralf Schumacher and Takuma Sato. Ralf went for a move up the inside of turn 1, but watch what happens when they reach turn 2. Ralf cuts across and the pair make contact! Ralf was sent spinning and flying through the air and was forced to make a pit stop at the end of the lap to change his ruined tyres. As for Sato, he lost 4th place to Trulli, but continued on without much damage. In all honesty, I think both drivers got away pretty luckily from this one, as this is the kind of incident that tends to crunch suspensions. As the race got more and more heated, Kimi Räikkönen's engine got the hottest of the lot as it detonated and took him out of the race. Remember, this is a brand new engine that was only fitted after practice, and somehow it had already given up. This was Kimi's 3rd retirement in a row in just the 3rd race of the season, meaning the 2003 championship runner-up was still on 0 points. His form would get no better until the introduction of the MP4 19B in July. Now, since we're in the era of qualifying fuel loads, there were of course a raft of early pit stops. Race leader Schumacher's stop went well, but Webber was released right alongside Coulthard, with the sole remaining McLaren driver regaining that position. Then it was Barrichello's turn to stop from the lead, but for whatever reason he was slow to get going, losing 3 or 4 seconds in the stop, but crucially still getting out ahead of Montoya. Sato stayed out for another lap, and Button stayed out for another 2, technically leading a lap before he too ducked into the pit lane. With pit stops still ongoing, Nick Heidfeld was running as high as 5th place in his Jordan until running off the road while being passed by Sato. He then made his pit stop at the end of the lap, dropping back out of the top 10. Oh, and it looks like the same corner caught out Christian Klien. He doesn't have the excuse of having a car alongside him though, so that's pure driver error. Whoopsie. Talking of whoopsies, watch the car ahead as we ride on board with Button as all sorts of sand and dust is kicked up in the air. That's Button's teammate Sato making a mistake, but unfortunately there's some terrible TV direction and we don't get to see the end of it, instead watching Pantano and Heidfeld trundling around in their Jordans. As Drake once said, BAR's fighting for P5? Nah. Jordan's not fighting for P16, now that's where it's at. We did at least get a replay which showed Takuma absolutely obliterating his front wing on a curb, allowing Jensen through and forcing an unscheduled pit stop. He eventually came out in P14. You'd be forgiven for forgetting that Michael Schumacher was even in this race, as his lead was up to 14 seconds before his second stop. He rejoined in third place and was nearly overtaken by Jarno Trulli, but the Renault driver was smart enough to know that fighting him would just lose them both time. Trulli himself pitted a lap later, and his stop also went smoothly. It was to be a 3-stop race for pretty much everyone. As for Trulli's teammate Alonso, he was finally making up places, targeting Mark Webber's Jaguar and 8th position. There was a bit of a hairy moment leading into turn 9 when Webber lifted off the throttle much earlier than Alonso expected, nearly getting clouted by the Renault on the straight. Luckily Fernando had his wits about him and avoided a collision, but they got very close again a lap later, with Webber defending extremely late on the straight. In a way, this almost reminds me of that famous clip from 2011 when these two went side by side into Eau Rouge and somehow came out unscathed. Finally Alonso got through after Webber locked up and ran wide at turn 1. All the time you have to leave a space, As for Ralf Schumacher's recovery drive, he was back into the top 10, although he did rather clout Giancarlo Fisichella on his way through. In Ralph's defence, Fizzy didn't really seem to know he was there, but still, when it Bahrains, it pours. Slightly further up the road, Sato had caught up to David Coulthard, but you might notice a little bit of trim hanging off his rear wing, presumably rattled loose by the little incident with the curb earlier on. This clearly didn't affect him too much though, as he was still more than a match for the McLaren in a straight line, and watch this as he makes a very bold dive into turn 1, only just getting through with no contact. That's 6th place now for Sato in one of his most spirited drives in F1. I mentioned earlier that this race was a 3-stopper for most drivers, and here we see Montoya exiting the pits after his 3rd stop. His main rival at this point in the race was Jarno Trulli, who you can just about see in the background, and the pair were racing for 3rd place. However, there was a new challenger emerging in the form of Jenson Button. After 2 relatively slow pit stops due to issues with the jack, Button was really putting the power down at this point and catching Trulli fast. I mean, obviously he was just shown as already being in 3rd place at this point, but that's just because he's due a pit stop. If BAR could get this next stop right, he could be in with a genuine chance of the podium. So here's the stop in question, and that's a lot quicker. Button exited the pit lane and saw Montoya go through, but crucially he got out ahead of Jarno Trulli. That's 4th place now for Jenson Button, just 2 weeks after his first F1 podium. Here we go then, Button right on the back of Montoya with just 9 laps to go in the race, and here's the move! Button darted up the inside, but he locked up and went wide. But look, Montoya's slowing! Button gets 3rd place! Unfortunately for Montoya, who had driven a great race right from the start, his car was beginning to falter thanks to gearbox troubles, and he had absolutely no chance of fighting for his place. Half a lap later, Jarno Trulli went through, and Montoya's fight for the podium turned into a fight just to get the dang thing to the finish. The car was sounding very sick in the acceleration zones, and my best guess is that it had lost 3rd or 4th gear, maybe both. Meanwhile, also in strife was David Coulthard, who retired his own car with 7 laps to go. As you can see, he actually tried to continue on initially, but then conked out at the end of the pit lane and retired for good. This put Ralf Schumacher back up into the points, despite all of the Williams drivers' own issues. What a strange race! You could say it's been bananas. Anyway, at the end of the day, it was obviously Michael Schumacher who came home first in a win that never looked in doubt. He could even have won by 15 seconds or more, but he backed off towards the end so the Ferraris could finish in formation, with Barrichello bringing home the 1-2. This was the 3rd of 5 straight wins for Schumacher in one of F1's all-time most predictable eras. 3rd place in the Grand Prix was Jenson Button, who took his 2nd of 3 straight podiums and actually moved up to 3rd place in the championship as a result. He was on a hell of a run. 4th in the end was Jarno Trulli. 5th was Takuma Sato, who had actually managed to hold off Fernando Alonso for the best part of 10 laps. 6th was of course Alonso, 7th was Ralf Schumacher, and 8th on a lap down was Mark Webber. This does of course mean that Montoya unfortunately failed to score a point, as he eventually crept over the line in 13th place, a very unlucky result after a very strong drive. 17 cars finished in total, with the Toyotas of Panis and Damata finishing just outside of the points in 9th and 10th. Guys, before I give this race a score, I want to let you know that I have a Daily Motion channel where I upload all the videos that get taken down from YouTube by the pesky FOM bots. While I accept that FOM owns the rights to the race footage I use, I believe that all of my videos fall under fair use due to the high levels of parody, commentary and review, and I always encourage people to watch Formula 1 live in order to better appreciate this great sport. Sadly, this isn't always enough. I also occasionally stream on Twitch, where you can chat to me live, so I've included the links to both my Daily Motion and my Twitch channel in the description of this video. Thank you. I gave the Grand Prix a 6.3 out of 10, as I actually quite enjoyed it. It was definitely one of the better Bahrain Grand Prix, and I've also given it +1 bonus point for its historical significance as the first ever Grand Prix in the desert. It is of course rather let down by its lack of championship implications, as everyone knew by this point that Ferrari and Schumacher would sweep the standings. By the way, any modern F1 fans tuning in may have been surprised to see the Bahrain Grand Prix run in the daytime, and you'd be right in knowing that nowadays it's run at night. However, F1 didn't run a night race until 2008, and the Bahrain Grand Prix wasn't a night race until 2014. Any long-term viewers may have already known this, and if that applies to you, well, aren't you a clever clogs? I gave the Driver of the Day award for Best Driver to Michael Schumacher, and I know that's a boring option, but the truth is that he was just the best driver in this era, bar none. This is actually the second video in a row where he's won the prestigious DOTD, but surprisingly only the third time on this channel, with the other two being the 1991 Italian and 1994 Pacific Grand Prix. Special mentions have to go to Fernando Alonso for finishing 6th from 16th on the grid, and to Juan Pablo Montoya, who was on course for a podium before that unfortunate gearbox failure. I'll give the Inouye trophy for worst driver to the other Schumacher, Ralph, who had a rather clumsy day and just seemed to be a bit of a liability. Apparently he even hit several mechanics during a pit stop, and although everyone was okay, that's definitely got to dock you some popularity points. This is the thing with Ralf Schumacher. On his day he was excellent, but he could have just as many clumsy days where he drove like absolute rubbish. This is his third Inouye trophy. Drive safely guys, and I'll see you next time.